Ladies and gentlemen, drivers, gig workers, and everyone in between, welcome to This Week in Rideshare podcast. I'm your host, Jared Hoffa. It is Friday, August 23rd, I believe, and this week, drivers defy Uber, Nevada on the ballot, and Uber hires ex-Tesla. LegalRideshare breaks it down. And from LegalRideshare, I'm joined by the co-founder and lead attorney, Bryant Greening. Bryant, happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jared. Great to be back for another episode of This Week in Rideshare.
Yeah, I really wung the date this week. I actually forgot what day it was. I got it right, though. It's the 23rd, right? Yeah, it is the 23rd. Woo!
It is the 23rd. The month is flying by. The summer is almost gone. It's hard to believe.
Honestly, I had to look at the calendar there. I thought it was September, but it's close. It's not yet. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. But we're going to get started here. A lot of great topics. Before we start with the topics, of course, we like to do viewer comments. So obviously, if you're watching on YouTube or anywhere else, please feel free to comment. This is from last week. Now, this is from Mono Taylor. And this is actually for you, Bryant. This is, he said, Rodeo sent me, if I fell and hurt delivering groceries because there was no light near the sidewalk to the door, is that just my problem, or do I have a case? So Bryant, I think we did respond to this, but if this happens to a delivery person, they're trying to deliver groceries, there's no light, they get injured because they can't see where they're walking, is that a case, yes or no?
Yeah, well, it's a little hazy. I mean, to be just straightforward, it's not the simplest injury case because there doesn't necessarily seem to be a defect in what he's describing. Poor lighting conditions can cause and contribute to falls, and certainly you could make that claim if you filed a lawsuit. But more often than not, in most states, you need to show that there's a defective condition that caused the injury if you're going to sue the property owner or the person who controls that area. Things like broken sidewalks or loose bricks. If there's some like a handle that you grab on and it falls and that causes you to lose your balance. It's those sorts of conditions that are most often associated with successful personal injury claims. Now, we have seen cases where poor lighting conditions have been successfully pursued, but that's really on a case-by-case basis, and it matters what state you're in. So what I would recommend is you reach out to an injury attorney in your state of residence to find out if the lighting conditions is a viable claim. Taking a step back, most gig workers in most states are not entitled to workers' compensation benefits. So if you were a traditional employee and got injured on the job for any reason, whether the lighting condition was good or bad, you would have a claim to make through that workers' compensation insurance. Gig workers, however, because of their independent contractor status, are not entitled to that benefit in most situations. So that's one of the reasons why we fight for better protections, why we want these gig companies to have to put plans in place for when a driver or delivery person is injured on the job, regardless of the circumstances. It shouldn't come down to, was there a defective condition? Were the lighting conditions bad or good? Did you get injured while you were on the job? You should be entitled to compensation. And that's really what we're fighting for in jurisdictions all over the country. Fairness, fundamental rights. If you get injured on the job, you should be able to recover.
Right, and well said, and something that we discuss often on the show, and something you bring up, which is absolutely true. So we're going to head off into the first story of this week. Drivers in Kenya defy Uber to survive. This is from NTV, and they reported, quote, a bruising price war between ride-hailing companies Uber and Estonia's Bolt and local startups Lidl and Fares have driven fares down to a level that many drivers say is unsustainable, forcing them to set their own higher rates. Many are now saying they use walkie-talkie app Zello to collectively agree on higher prices, meaning a customer will get the same rate even if they shop around. Drivers have also produced a fare guide, which they print, laminate, and post up inside their cars for customers to see. So what's happening here, Bryant, there's a lot to this story, basically, which is really interesting, and I want to hear your side on this. drivers are basically saying, yeah, we know what Uber's charging you and what Bolt is, but it's not enough for us. So this is what we recommend you pay us when you take the ride. Interesting play. And obviously Uber is not thrilled about this move.
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple thoughts on it. And the first thought was these drivers would be deactivated so fast in the United States. This
Yeah.
would never, Uber and Lyft would really lay down the hammer. I'm glad it seems like they're not doing that in Kenya, but what we are from a more serious perspective, I'm loving the fact that drivers are working together to try to protect themselves because nobody else is going to do it. So the fact that they are coming together, despite, regardless of what company they're working for, that they're coming up with what they believe to be a livable wage and a fair price, and they're sticking to their guns. They're not, they're not competing against themselves, which I think is really important. They're all out there for the same purpose, using their collective voice and getting what they're entitled to and what's fair in terms of the money that they should be making for each ride. So just from a global perspective, I think that this is the type of initiative that needs to be applauded. And while it may not work in the U.S., the fact that we're seeing drivers come together, work together, advocate on behalf of themselves, and as a collective unit. I think it's heartening, and I think it's important for drivers to see that it can work when you use your voice in collaboration with others.
Yeah, and it's clear to mention here that, or it's important to mention here that this isn't due to drivers saying, well, we want to make more money and be greedy. This is due to the country is going through a major issue. They said, the nation of 50 million people have been rocked by deadly protests against tax hikes. And they can't even access or buy basic commodities. And what they're doing on top of this, which is interesting, they're actually working together. So it's not like these drivers are saying, well, I'm gonna make a ton of money in this area, and then you're gonna make even more. They're actually negotiating together. They're almost creating their own ecosystem and saying, we all collectively agree this should be the price. And like you said, they would be deactivated in zero point 0.2 seconds in the United States. But I mean, these people are struggling to just survive to live. And so I understand why they're doing this. And yet again, it just proves that ultimately you got to pay the drivers what they need to be paid. It's either going to collapse or they're going to find a way to make the money. So honestly, good on them.
Right. And just one last thing is I could see this going even further, and maybe the drivers start some sort of collective where they have their own rideshare company based on the numbers that they need to survive. And it's when these drivers pull their resources together and their momentum together that you can really put pressure on the big companies. If all these drivers decided Uber and Lyft aren't paying us enough, or Bolt and whoever else is out there, we're going to start our own thing, and this is the cost. Well, the bigger companies are going to have trouble finding drivers to meet the demand in those areas, and the customers are going to have to follow. So I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but this is how those sorts of movements begin, and it'll be really interesting to see if they're able to push the companies to pay them more, or and continue to work for those big companies, or if they eventually drift away from the established companies and start their own thing.
Yeah, which is a good point. We've seen things like this grow into those grassroots efforts and organizations, so it absolutely could. It's a good point. We're going to head off into story number 2. Uber's big spend in Nevada may just be the beginning. And this is from Fast Company. And they reported, quote, in recent months, Uber has quietly pledged millions of dollars in support of a somewhat obscure ballot measure in Nevada. This is some New York Times report last week, revealed that the ride-sharing company has invested $5 million into Nevadans for Fair Recovery, a political action committee created by Uber and the driving force behind the ballot campaign. Now, this seems like an unusual position for Uber to stake out. The company has framed the ballot measure as a win for plaintiffs since it would curtail attorneys' fees. But the Times reported, along with the plaintiffs' attorneys who have spoken out against the proposal, have argued it is more likely a strategy to reduce the number of lawsuits and legal claims Uber is facing over the misconduct. The story then goes on, Bryant, to talk about this is basically a testing ground. And we had talked about this last week with this ballot measure in Nevada, but it seems like they're feeling out if they could do this other places. And I think you might have even brought that up.
Yeah, last week we talked about this in detail, and I got up on my high horse and defended personal injury attorneys and the personal injury process and the fact that we set these contingencies in a way that makes it so that the average person, the person who can't afford to pay a lawyer by the hour, has access to the legal system. And I'm not going to go through my whole spiel again because you can go back to last week and listen to me rant about it if you're interested. But what I'll say is it's very clear that Uber is not doing this for the people. They see this as a way to suppress lawsuits that are brought against them that are costing them a lot of money. And the reason why these lawsuits are important is they're forcing Uber to, one, be accountable for their failures of the past, and two, understand that if they don't take safety seriously, they're going to have future litigation brought against them. So there's compensating people for what's already been done and protecting people in the future are two very important components of these cases. And by attacking the plaintiff's bar and by saying personal injury attorneys' fees should be capped at some certain number, certain percentage, or damages for injured people should be capped at some figure, what they're doing is saying, we're going to take the demand away for the injured person. They're not going to be able to find representation, which means they're not going to be able to successfully bring a lawsuit, which means that Uber and Lyft are not going to have their feet held to the fire for things like safety, for requiring that certain baseline safety features are in place, and for being held accountable when their systems fail. People need to have access to the court system and have access to strong, educated, knowledgeable advocates who know how to hold companies responsible. And Uber right now is trying to take that advocacy away. This is not for the little person. This is not for the average man. This is to put more money in Uber's pocket and keep it there. Bottom line.
Yeah, and the good news is it seems like as much as I try to spin this, most people are calling their bluff. So I think what's going to be interesting is to see, if this doesn't pass in Nevada, doesn't become on the ballot, are they going to keep pushing this? I think they're going to, at least for a while. We saw what they did with Prop 22. So I guess we got to see what happens at this first domino effect here. And if it doesn't move, they may back off or they may keep going. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that they're going to test a couple different markets, and I think maybe they will have some success in some states that have been traditionally, less willing to, more tort reform based, less looking out for the worker, more looking out for the big business. So certainly they could see some success in little pockets around the country, but I do not see this being a broad sweeping policy that takes place nationwide.
Yeah, we certainly hope that doesn't happen. But you're right. I think for once, they might have bit off more than they can chew. We'll head off into the final story here. Uber hires an ex-Tesla executive to oversee EV. This is from Bloomberg, and they reported, quote, Uber Technologies has hired former Tesla executive Rebecca to oversee the ride-hailing platform shift to electric vehicles, tapping a veteran who helped open the car maker's charging network to other brands. In the new role, she will oversee Uber's transition to a zero-emission platform. The company is aiming for all its rides and deliveries globally to be made using zero-emission vehicles by 2040. It's also working to eliminate unnecessary plastic waste from restaurant deliveries and use more sustainable packaging. So again, it seems to be this line between Uber and Tesla is getting pretty gray, Brian.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of overlap, and I think it's a good hire. I think, obviously, whatever you think of Elon Musk, he's created a company that is green in a broad sense. Electric vehicles are the wave of the future. It's Uber and Lyft and the other companies put a ton of cars on the road. So I like the idea that they are prioritizing a shift towards a more sustainable, greener future, which is consistent with what a lot of states are requiring. Uber and Lyft have put deadlines on when they want to be, zero emission. And I know that states around the country and even the federal government are placing deadlines on, on the same thing. So I think it's great when big business has their eye on a goal, which is ultimately sustainability, and that's going to help everybody. And if they can put more drivers in electric vehicles, that's going to help keep dollars in drivers' pockets because things will be cheaper, such as gas. These are well-made cars, so hopefully maintenance is less. It's going to be a long road. A lot of drivers use older vehicles, and certainly we understand and respect that it's not going to be a quick transition. But I like that they're taking it seriously, and I like that if they can help put drivers in better, greener vehicles, everybody's going to win.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was a smart hire. Obviously they're really pushing this initiative. Like you said, I think the key is making sure that drivers are ready for it. And I know they're giving a long window here. And so it's just got to see. This is definitely the long game. It clearly seems to be, the future. But again, it is very interesting to see just how these companies are just kind of weaving in and out of each other, and they're really connected a lot more than I think either thought they would be initially. Which could be a win for everyone, honestly. Could be a good thing.
Yeah, they
Sorry, go
scratch
ahead.
each other. No, I mean, I don't have much more to say. They scratch each other's back a little bit here. It's a mutually beneficial relationship, and I could see it really, getting much closer as we as we go forward.
Yeah, totally. Well, that is the stories for this week. So, Brian, I will give you the last word before we head off into the weekend.
Just always remind everybody that as we head into the weekend, if you find yourself in an accident or injury situation, you can reach out to Legal Rideshare. We are here for free consultations. We want to help lay a solid foundation for your injury claim, meaning doing the right things, talking to the right people, making the right reports, seeking the treatment that you may need, doing everything possible to ensure that when you make that claim to the insurance company, you're going to get every dollar that you're entitled to for your injury, your medical bills, your lost wages, and every other damage that you sustain. So legalrideshare.com is the best way to get in touch with us. All of our contact information is there. Please do not hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. And now two things before we head off here. Number one, please make sure to fill out our driver survey. We are giving away $100 to people who filled that out, a random drawing. The link is below. You can see it in the description of the YouTube video. Second thing, if you don't want to watch the YouTube video and you're driving and want to hear the podcast, we are on the major platforms. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify, anywhere that you get podcasts, This Week in Rideshare is on it. So please make sure to tune in that way too. But as I like to say, that is the end of This Week in Rideshare. See you next week.